The rain beat incessantly against the stained windows of the trailer, a constant drumming that echoed Olivia Thompson's loneliness. Outside, the cold wind howled, but the real ice, the true emptiness, was inside her. The despair in the small space blended with the muffled sound of Liam's crying, her baby just a few months old. The air was heavy with a secret that time itself didn't seem able to lift. Sitting on the edge of the messy bed, Olivia felt her body frozen. Her hands trembled slightly over her knees as she stared at the makeshift crib, a simple cardboard box lined with old, grimy blankets. Tears silently slid down her pale face, etched with exhaustion. She seemed to be fighting with herself, as if every movement required a strength she no longer had. "Just one more minute, just one more minute," she whispered, her voice broken by fear and guilt. She knew Liam needed her, but every time she looked at him, something inside her recoiled, as if she were incapable of feeling that unconditional love everyone said should come automatically. And this absence of love, this failure, consumed her from the inside out. On the other side of the thin trailer wall, a soft knock echoed. It was Mrs. Martinez, the elderly neighbor, always watchful, always concerned. "Olivia, dear, the little one's been crying for so long. Are you okay?" The woman's voice carried genuine concern, but also a weight Olivia didn't know how to bear. "I know," Olivia responded, feeling her voice break at the end of the sentence. I'm coming." With slow, hesitant steps, she approached the crib. Every step felt like a battle against the memories of that night, the night that changed everything. The rain falling outside was the same as the night she was assaulted behind the restaurant where she worked. She could still smell the alcohol on the man's breath, feel the weight of his body crushing hers, the muffled screams against the dirty walls of the alley. And Liam, the baby born from that cursed night, was a constant reminder. "Why can't you forgive me?" she whispered, looking at Liam's wrinkled face, now hiccuping from crying so much. She picked him up with her still trembling hands, but her arms refused to pull him close to her chest. "I just wish it were different, that I were different." At that moment, Mrs. Martinez unceremoniously entered the trailer. Her eyes immediately landed on Olivia, who sat on the floor, rocking Liam with mechanical motions, as if the weight of the baby was an anchor holding her at the bottom of a sea of regret. "My dear, you haven't eaten anything today, have you?" The question was simple, but it carried a world of implications. Olivia shook her head, too drained to respond. I can't. Every time I look at him, it's like I'm back in that alley." "You need help, child." Mrs. Martinez approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, but there was an urgency in her voice. "You can't keep going like this." Olivia let out a bitter laugh. "Who's going to help me, Mrs. Martinez? I don't even have enough money to buy his formula this week. The social worker only comes by once a month, and the support group is across town. I have no way to get there." She looked at Liam, who was finally starting to calm down in her arms. For a brief moment, his tiny face seemed like just any ordinary child's. But then Liam's eyes opened, and Olivia shuddered. Every time she saw those eyes, it was like the past staring back at her, like the very face of the man who assaulted her was etched into her son. "Sometimes," she whispered, so low that Mrs. Martinez almost didn't hear, "I wake up in the middle of the night and watch him sleep, trying to feel that love they say every mother feels. But all I feel is emptiness." Olivia stepped away from the crib, feeling the weight of Mrs. Martinez's gaze on her back. The elderly woman didn't say anything more, but there was compassion in her eyes. She knew that Olivia's wounds went deeper than any words of comfort could heal. She knew the young woman carried a burden no mother should have to bear. But Olivia was already beyond consolation. Every glance at Liam, every knock on the door, was like her world was slowly crumbling. She knew she couldn't go on like this. But what do you do when the very source of your pain is there, crying, begging for a love you can't give? Liam's cries filled the silence once more, and Olivia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. What was she going to do now? How long can someone live on the edge of the abyss without falling? And what happens when the love that's supposed to save you never comes? The early morning hours crept in, and the silence of the trailer was only broken by Liam's occasional muffled sobs. Olivia had put him back into the cardboard box she'd fashioned into a crib, But she couldn't shake the thoughts pounding in her head. Outside, the rain persisted, as if the sky was crying with her. Every drop hitting the roof felt like a reminder that her time was running out. Olivia rose from the bed, her bare feet touching the cold, damp floor of the trailer. She was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Her head was a whirlwind of dark thoughts, bitter memories, and decisions she didn't want to make. She walked over to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall and stared at her reflection. The hollow eyes and face marked by fatigue looked like they belonged to a stranger, a woman she barely recognized. Part of her wanted to believe there was still a way out. Maybe, if she tried hard enough, she could find some fragment of love for Liam buried inside her. Maybe there was a way to survive all this and move forward. But every time that hope surfaced, the past would smother it again. Olivia's face hardened. There was no more time for maybe. She needed a solution, and that solution was slowly taking shape in her mind, like a shadow coming into form. She approached Liam, now asleep, his tiny fingers clutching an old rag she'd used as a blanket. For a moment, Olivia allowed herself to look at him differently. He seemed so innocent there, defenseless, as if the world hadn't touched his soul yet. But the moment of tenderness was brief. Soon, the weight of everything came crashing down again, and the despair drowned out any other feeling. She knew what she had to do. The thought had already been there, lingering in the corners of her mind, waiting to be accepted. She grabbed an old backpack from the closet and began packing some clothes. Her hands shook as she folded Liam's tiny outfits, each fold carrying the bitter certainty of what she was about to do. She felt the weight of guilt intensify with every movement, but she didn't stop. She knew there was no other option. Outside, the rain was finally letting up, but the wind still howled, bringing a chill that cut straight to the bone. Olivia wrapped Liam in a thick blanket, trying to shield him from the storm that wasn't just in the sky, but also within her. She carried him to the door of the trailer and stood there, feeling the cold air rush in, chilling her skin and solidifying her thoughts. Olivia knew what she was about to do would haunt her for the rest of her life. There was no turning back. But she convinced herself it was for the best, that he would have a chance she couldn't give. Stepping out of the trailer, Olivia held Liam close to her chest, her heart pounding wildly. The rain had turned into a light drizzle, but the cold remained relentless. She walked through the deserted streets, her bare feet slapping against the wet pavement, her eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. Every step felt like the last chance to stop, but she didn't. When she reached the gas station, illuminated only by a dim, flickering light, Olivia hesitated for a moment. The place was empty, just the sound of the wind cutting through the silence. It was the perfect spot, she thought. No one would see her. No one would judge her in this moment. Near the trash bin, she found a relatively dry cardboard box sheltered by the awning. She knelt beside the box, tears now streaming freely down her face. It was time to say goodbye. She gently placed Liam inside, tucking the blanket around him to keep him warm. He stirred a little, but didn't wake. Olivia pulled a small note from her pocket. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely place the paper beside the baby. "Please take care of him," she had written in her shaky handwriting. "Take care of Liam. I can't anymore. I'm not the mother he deserves." She knelt there for a few minutes, unable to move. She stared at Liam's tiny body, her son, and felt the emptiness inside her grow until it almost suffocated her. It was as if the world around her had slowed down, like time was waiting for her, offering one last chance to change her mind. But then, Liam opened his eyes. His gaze met hers, and in that moment, Olivia felt something inside her shatter. A wave of pain surged through her chest. She knew he didn't understand what was happening, but the way he looked at her, as if he sensed something was wrong, was too much for her to bear. "Don't look at me like that. Please don't look at me like that," she whispered, her voice full of anguish. "Forgive me, baby. Forgive me for being so weak. I just wish things were different." Olivia felt panic rise in her throat. She had to leave. She had to run before the regret consumed her. With one last look at Liam, she stood, her knees trembling. Her feet began moving on their own, and soon she was running, not daring to look back. The distance between her and the baby grew with every step, the sound of her sobs drowned out by the wind. The gas station faded into the background. Just like Liam, the early morning hours were still pressing on when Olivia finally stopped running. Gasping for air, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through her chest, she leaned against a damp brick wall, trying to catch her breath. Her bare feet were covered in mud, and the biting cold wind seemed to freeze her to the bone. The emptiness around her now seemed to stretch inside her as well. Something had changed forever. She had left Liam. He was there, alone, in the middle of the night, in a cardboard box beside a trash bin. Olivia tried to convince herself that what she did was best for him, but the guilt swelling inside her was a crushing weight. Part of her wanted to go back, hold him, and beg for forgiveness, but another, darker, more desperate part of her screamed that it was already too late. "He's better off without me," she repeated in her mind like a mantra. But the truth was, that phrase sounded less convincing with each repetition. Olivia slid down the rough walls until she was sitting on the wet ground, wrapping her arms around herself, trying in vain to warm her body. In her mind, the memories of that night, 9 months ago, came back with full force, tearing through the layers of self-protection she had built. That night when everything fell apart, it was a cold night, much like this one. Olivia had left work early, exhausted after hours of washing dishes and serving tables at the rundown restaurant downtown. Back then, she still had a home, still lived with her family, and despite the difficulties, there was still a glimmer of hope that things might improve. But that night, as she hurried through the narrow alley behind the restaurant, something happened. She heard footsteps rushing behind her. A chill ran up her spine, but she didn't have time to react. A large, rough hand dragged her into the darkness. She remembered the stench of alcohol on the man's breath, the sound of her own muffled pleas beneath his filthy hand. Panic consumed her, and then, silence. Her body had been violated, her mind shattered. Olivia had returned home that night with her soul in pieces, unable to tell anyone what had happened. The words simply wouldn't come. And when she found out weeks later that she was pregnant, it was as if her life had finally crumbled. Her family, instead of offering support, threw her out, calling her a liar, saying it was all her fault. She tried in every way to ignore the pregnancy, as if denying it would make the pain and trauma disappear, but it didn't. And then Liam was born, and with him came the raw, unforgiving reality she had tried so hard to avoid. The boy was a living reminder of everything she had lost, of everything that had been taken from her. The memories ripped Olivia back to the present. Sitting on the sidewalk, hugging herself, she wondered how it had come to this. How had life become so suffocating, so hopeless? What was left now? Everything she had known seemed so far away. Yet one question echoed inside her, even amidst the whirlwind of thoughts. What now? While Olivia wrestled with her own demons, the early morning hours continued, indifferent to her suffering. At the gas station, the heavy silence of the night was broken by the sound of an approaching engine. A garbage truck was making its usual rounds through the city streets. Damon Miller, the driver, was once again making his rounds, something he did every day in the early hours. Damon was a man of few words, a loner, but with a good heart. His life hadn't been easy, marked by loss and frustration, but he always carried on, clinging to the little he had. That night, his fingers were numb from the cold, even with the worn-out gloves he wore. He jumped down from the truck and headed toward the bins at the station, his body heavy, moving almost automatically. As he lifted the lid of one of the trash bins, he heard something unexpected. A faint sound, almost like a whimper, coming from nearby. At first, he thought it was a stray cat. It wouldn't have been the first time he found a lost animal on his route. But the sound continued, weaker, more human. Confused, Damon approached a cardboard box left beside the trash bin. He knelt down, his eyes widening as he saw the small body wrapped in blankets. "My God," he murmured, carefully picking up the box. Inside, the baby stirred, its little eyes gleaming in the darkness. Damon was stunned. Who could do this, he thought, his voice low, almost incredulous. He picked up the note that was with the baby and quickly read the shaky words. "Please take care of him. Take care of Liam. I can't anymore. I'm not the mother he deserves." His heart tightened. What was he supposed to do now? Hand the baby over to the authorities, as expected? But as he looked at the small face, something changed inside him. The boy grabbed his finger with surprising strength, as if begging not to be left behind again. "Liam, is that what you said his name is?" Damon murmured, more to himself than to the baby. Suddenly, the decision was made. He didn't know why, he didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't turn his back on this little being. Damon, who had so often felt alone, now held something, someone, who made him feel that maybe, just maybe, he had a different purpose in life. "You're not alone anymore, little one. I'll take care of you. I promise everything's going to be okay." Her last connection to a life. The sun was just beginning to break through the night's veil when Damon Miller arrived at the hospital, Liam cradled in his arms. The baby slept peacefully, finally at ease, wrapped in Damon's heavy coat. The journey there had been surreal for him, someone who never imagined being in such a situation. Every stoplight he passed, every car that crossed his path, made him question what he was about to do. But one thing was certain, he couldn't just ignore that baby. Abandoned in the cold as if he didn't matter. Damon felt as though life had handed him an unexpected gift, but along with it, a heavy burden. Inside the hospital, the receptionist looked at him in shock as he walked in, a large, weary man carrying a baby wrapped in his coat. Damon quickly explained the situation, and within minutes, Liam was taken to be examined. He sat there in the waiting room, his heart still racing. What was he supposed to do now? His life wasn't easy. He worked late into the night collecting the city's trash, barely managing to pay the rent for his small apartment. Raising a baby was never part of the plan. He rubbed his face with his calloused hands, trying to think of a solution. Soon, a social worker appeared, a thin woman with a serious expression, looking him up and down with suspicion. "Mr. Miller, correct?" she asked, sizing him up. "You found the baby?" Damon nodded. "Yeah, he was in a box next to the trash bin at the gas station. He seemed okay, but I figured he needed help." The social worker sighed. "Well, the boy seems healthy, all things considered. We'll take him to a temporary shelter until we can find a foster family." Damon felt a tightening in his chest. A temporary shelter? The thought of Liam being shuffled from place to place with no one to protect him deeply disturbed him. He'd seen too many kids go through tough situations, many of them never finding a permanent home. Something inside him screamed that this wasn't right. "Look," Damon began, hesitant but firm, "I know my situation isn't ideal. I'm barely scraping by. But this baby, he grabbed my finger when I found him. I felt like he needed me." The social worker raised her eyebrows, surprised. "You want to keep the baby?" Damon took a deep breath. "I don't know how I'm going to do this, but yes, he chose me. I can't just abandon him again. I can't." The woman studied him for a long moment, assessing the sincerity in his tired eyes. "Mr. Miller, raising a child is a huge responsibility. You have to understand your financial situation." I know, he interrupted, "but I'll figure it out. He can't go to a shelter. He deserves more than that." The social worker hesitated. She'd seen many cases like Damon's, people with good intentions, but who couldn't sustain the decision once reality hit. However, something about Damon's determination made her reconsider. "All right, we'll see what we can do. But understand, this will be a long process, and we'll need a full assessment of your ability to care for the baby." Damon nodded, accepting the challenge without hesitation. He knew it would be tough, but he was ready. Liam had come into his life for a reason, and Damon felt this was his chance to do something that truly mattered. As he waited for Liam to be discharged, Damon couldn't stop thinking about what had driven the mother to abandon him like that. What kind of desperation had she felt to leave her baby beside a trash bin? He looked at the note once more, feeling the weight of the hurried, desperate words. "I'm not the mother he deserves." Those words echoed in his mind. Damon knew that, in a way, he wasn't the father Liam deserved either. He was just an ordinary man with few possessions and little stability. But in that moment, all he could offer was the most valuable thing he had, his heart, and he hoped that would be enough. She could no longer bear. Meanwhile, across the city, Olivia lay on the floor of the trailer, staring at the dark, damp ceiling, her body completely still. She had no idea how much time had passed since she had abandoned Liam. Minutes? Hours? Maybe it was morning, or maybe it was still night. Time had lost all meaning. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories of the baby's face, but they came crashing in, haunting her every thought. The soft sound of Liam's breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. Now they were just memories. All that remained was an unbearable emptiness. Olivia's mind was in turmoil. The guilt she thought would disappear once she walked away had only grown. She felt like she was sinking deeper into an abyss, a place of darkness and pain that she wasn't sure she could escape. What if no one found Liam in time? What if he didn't survive? These questions pounded in her head relentlessly. Suddenly, she jumped up, her heart racing. She couldn't just stay there, waiting. She needed to know what had happened. But how? She couldn't just go back to the gas station and pick up the baby. Not after what she had done. Still, something was pulling her back. Maybe it was guilt, maybe something deeper. She hurriedly dressed, grabbing the little money she had, and left the trailer, walking quickly. The cold morning air hit her, but she barely felt it. Fear had taken over her senses. Back at the hospital, Damon held Liam in his arms once again. The baby was healthy, with no signs of malnutrition or mistreatment, which eased his heart. He didn't know how he was going to keep his promise, but in that moment, he decided that no matter what, he would fight for Liam. Damon left the hospital, already planning in his mind what he needed to do. He'd have to talk to his boss to see if he could get more hours at work. Maybe he'd need to find a second job. He knew life would be even harder now. But as he looked at Liam's peaceful face, asleep in his arms, Damon felt that somehow it would all be worth it. The social worker had made it clear that the adoption process wouldn't be easy, especially for someone like him with so few resources. But Damon wouldn't let that discourage him. He had faced challenges before, and this would just be another one. As Damon walked through the empty streets, the sky began to lighten, and the first rays of sun appeared on the horizon. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. He couldn't quite explain it, but something inside him told him that from that moment on, his life would never be the same. And he was right. For Liam, for Damon, and for Olivia, the paths unfolding ahead were intertwined in a way no one could have predicted, and their destinies were about to change forever. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Damon Miller arrived at the worn-out apartment building where he lived. The weight of little Liam in his arms felt physically light, but the significance of it all weighed like a ton. His heart was still racing from the moment he found the baby, and now, as he climbed the creaky stairs, his mind swirled with questions and uncertainties. He stopped in front of the door to the small apartment where he lived with his wife, Sarah. She was likely still asleep after a long, exhausting night of work. Sarah worked as a janitor at the hospital, often coming home late, tired, but always smiling when she saw Damon. Damon hesitated for a moment before turning the knob, trying to imagine how Sarah would react to what he was about to say. It wasn't every day you brought home a baby, especially without any warning. He gently pushed the door open, trying not to make noise, but as soon as he stepped in, Liam let out a soft whimper, echoing through the quiet apartment. Sarah, who had been sleeping on the couch, woke up to the sound. She blinked a few times, trying to adjust her eyes to the faint morning light, and then saw Damon standing at the door holding something, or rather, someone in his arms. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock in a matter of seconds. "Damon, what is that?" she asked, standing slowly, her eyes wide as she stared at the baby he was cradling so carefully. Damon took a step inside, feeling a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure where to begin, but the words just spilled out. I found him, abandoned, out there, by a dumpster. I couldn't leave him there." Sarah's gaze locked onto Liam's tiny face. The initial shock quickly melted into a mix of emotions. She walked closer, her heart pounding with each step. As she got a closer look at the baby, something inside her broke. Her eyes welled up with tears. She reached out, gently touching Liam's cheek, who now looked at her with wide, curious eyes. "Oh my God, Damon," Sarah whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the boy. "How could anyone?" Her voice broke and tears began to roll down her face. Damon watched in silence, his heart heavy as he saw his wife's reaction. He knew Sarah had always wanted children, but life had never given them that chance. She had struggled with infertility for years, a painful journey that had brought them closer but left them both scarred. The desire to be a mother was something she always carried with her, and now, seeing Liam, that maternal instinct seemed to erupt like a volcano. She instinctively took the baby from Damon's arms, holding him close to her chest. Sarah rocked Liam gently, and he looked up at her with a calm expression, as if he had found a safe harbor. "He's so small, so helpless," Sarah murmured, cradling Liam with care. "How could anyone just leave him like that?" Damon felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because Sarah had immediately accepted the baby, and sadness because he knew caring for Liam would be harder than anything they had ever faced together. He sat down on the couch, rubbing his face with his hands. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know why anyone would do that, but he needs us." Sarah looked at Damon, her eyes still shining with tears. "And we need him, Damon." She sat beside her husband, holding little Liam, now peacefully asleep in her arms. "He didn't come to us by accident. You know that, don't you?" Damon nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, but how are we going to do this? We don't have money. We barely make ends meet. I don't even know where to start." Sarah took a deep breath, gently stroking Liam's forehead. "We always find a way, Damon. We'll find a way now, too. He came to us for a reason, and I'm not letting him go. Not after everything we've been through." Damon felt his chest tighten with emotion. He knew Sarah was right. Liam hadn't crossed their path by chance, but the practical difficulties still loomed over them like a dark cloud. "We're going to need help," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll talk to the social worker, see what we can do." Sarah nodded. "I'll see if we can get some things from the hospital. Maybe the nurses can help us with diapers, formula, whatever we need. We'll figure it out. We'll give him what he needs." For a moment, silence filled the apartment. Sarah continued rocking Liam, and Damon watched, unable to look away. Seeing Sarah with the baby in her arms was like watching a dream he had long since given up on. She was glowing, as if the pain of never being able to be a mother had finally found some unexpected healing. Liam shifted slightly, letting out a soft, contented sound, as if he knew he was safe. Sarah smiled, still with tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect, Damon. Absolutely perfect." Damon felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time since he had found Liam, he felt that despite all the challenges, things might just work out. They would make this work. Somehow, they would find a way. Meanwhile, Olivia was on the other side of the city, still racing through the streets with a desperate urgency. Her heart felt heavy, her clothes soaked with sweat and rain, and her feet ached, but she didn't stop. With every block she passed, with every person she approached for answers, her fear and guilt grew. What had she done? How could she have left her baby behind? And worse, what had happened to him? When she finally arrived at the gas station, the place was nearly empty. Olivia looked around, out of breath, searching for any sign of Liam, the box, anything that might give her a clue. But the box she had left near the trash bin was empty, soaked through, as if its contents had disappeared along with the early morning rain. She ran to the cashier, an elderly man who looked at her in confusion as she began to frantically ask questions. "Did you see a baby? A small boy, he was here. Please, tell me you saw something." The man shook his head, still trying to grasp her urgency. "A baby? I didn't see anything. Just the garbage truck came by, but I didn't see anyone leave a baby. Miss, are you all right?" The moment she heard garbage truck, Olivia felt the world spin around her. Fear paralyzed her. What if he had been taken with the trash? The thought was too overwhelming to bear. She shook her head, unable to respond to the man. Tears started streaming down her face as she walked away, running again through the streets, aimlessly searching for an answer that seemed impossible to find. Back at the apartment, Damon and Sarah sat together, with Liam still asleep between them. The small apartment felt warmer in that moment, filled with an energy they hadn't felt in a long time. Damon looked at Sarah, who was gently stroking Liam's head, and despite all the uncertainties, he knew there was something special about it all. They had found a new reason to move forward. But while the fates of Damon, Sarah, and Liam were beginning to intertwine, Olivia was sinking deeper into emotional chaos, more lost in her desperate search. She didn't know that the child she had abandoned had found shelter, safety, and perhaps even love. All she knew was that the emptiness in her heart kept growing, and the fear of never seeing Liam again drove her on an endless journey. The muffled sound of rain against the windows continued to echo in Damon and Sarah's small apartment, but inside, the atmosphere was filled with hope and emotion. Little Liam slept peacefully in Sarah's arms while Damon watched, still trying to process what all of this meant. Even though financial and practical worries hung over them like a cloud, there was a sense of wholeness, something the two hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the apartment felt alive. Sarah, still emotional, could hardly take her eyes off the boy. Every time she held him, she felt something inexplicable growing inside her. It was as if all the wounds left by infertility, by the unfulfilled dream of becoming a mother, were beginning to heal. She leaned down and kissed Liam's forehead, breathing in that soft, innocent scent only a baby has. "He looks so peaceful," Sarah murmured, almost to herself. Damon, sitting beside her, watched silently, feeling the tension slowly lift from his shoulders. Even with all the uncertainties, it seemed like the universe had brought Liam to them for a reason neither of them fully understood yet. Damon took Sarah's hand, intertwining their fingers. "I don't know how we're going to do this," he said quietly, "but I know we'll find a way. He's ours now." Sarah smiled, a bittersweet smile, but filled with hope. "Yes, Damon, he's ours, and we'll give him everything he needs, even if we have to sacrifice everything." Meanwhile, in the streets of Detroit, Olivia continued her relentless search for Liam. The sky, once heavy with dark clouds, began to clear, allowing the morning sunlight to try to warm the wet streets. But for Olivia, the brightness of the day only brought more despair. Every corner she turned without finding an answer felt like another blow. She was exhausted, her body weighed down by guilt and fear, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She had asked everyone she crossed paths with, from taxi drivers to lone passersby. No one had seen a baby or a particular garbage truck. Her only clue was the vague memory of the man at the gas station who had mentioned the garbage truck. The streets around her seemed to blur as she ran aimlessly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her mind repeated one question over and over: "What have I done?" Deep down, Olivia knew she had made the most desperate decision of her life when she left Liam in that box. She believed she was doing what was best for him, believed she wasn't capable of being the mother he needed. But now, facing the emptiness where her son should be, she realized this wasn't the end of her guilt. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would never end. If Liam had been taken by the garbage truck, if he was somewhere far away, suffering or worse. She couldn't finish the thought. The idea was unbearable. She finally stopped in an empty park, collapsing to her knees on the wet grass. Her hands dug into the soaked earth as if she could find answers there. The tears she had tried to hold back since leaving Liam now flowed freely, mixing with the light rain that began to fall again. Olivia was on the verge of collapse. She had made an irreversible mistake, and she didn't know how to deal with the crushing pain that now consumed her. But even so, something inside her, a flicker of desperate hope, pushed her to keep going. She knew she couldn't give up on finding her son. Back at the apartment, Sarah began organizing the few things they had. She pulled out some old baby clothes from the closet, ones her sister had left behind when her nieces and nephews were small. There weren't many pieces, but it was a start. Sarah knew they would need so much more: diapers, formula, and all kinds of things neither she nor Damon had imagined they'd need so soon. She looked over at Damon, who was scrolling through his phone, searching for more information on how to contact the social worker. He looked determined but exhausted. Life had already been a daily struggle for them, and now, with Liam, the weight of responsibility had grown exponentially. "Damon," Sarah called softly. He looked up, distracted, but smiled when he saw her holding Liam again, now dressed in the baby clothes. "He looks at home, doesn't he?" Damon nodded. "He does. It feels right, like he was always meant to be here." Sarah walked over and sat next to him on the couch, the baby still sleeping peacefully. "I know it's going to be hard. We're going to have to fight against the world. But Damon, you know we can't give up on him now. Something inside me tells me that this boy came to us for a reason." Damon sighed, leaning his head back against the couch. "I know, but we're going to need more help than we ever imagined. I'll try to get more hours at work, maybe pick up a side job." Before he could finish, a loud knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah and Damon exchanged tense glances. It wasn't common for someone to show up at this hour, especially with the morning just beginning. Damon stood up slowly and walked to the door. When he opened it, he was met by the stern figure of a gray-haired woman with a serious expression. It was the social worker he had contacted earlier to report what had happened with Liam. "Mr. Miller, may I come in?" she asked, her voice direct and no nonsense. Damon nodded, opening the door wider for her to enter. Sarah, still holding Liam, watched cautiously. The social worker stepped inside and immediately looked at the baby. Her face, initially rigid, softened slightly as she saw him in Sarah's arms. She approached slowly, her expression shifting to something more professional. "So, this is the boy you found?" Damon moved closer to Sarah, crossing his arms as he tried to explain. "Yes, he was left by a dumpster. I brought him home because I couldn't just leave him there." The social worker nodded, taking a quick look around the apartment. Her gaze was evaluative, assessing whether this place was suitable for a child. She turned back to Damon, her expression still serious. "Mr. Miller, I understand that your intentions were good, but your situation isn't ideal for raising a child, especially one this young. We'll need to assess this carefully." Damon felt the weight of her words, but before he could respond, Sarah, with a firm voice, interrupted. "We know we don't have much to offer, but one thing we have is love, and no one's going to give him that in a shelter." The social worker seemed to consider this for a moment, glancing at the baby asleep in Sarah's arms. "Love is important, no doubt, but we need to make sure he has the basic necessities to grow. This isn't something that can be done on a whim." Sarah didn't back down. "He was abandoned. We're here. We're willing to do whatever it takes to give him a better life." Damon watched his wife with admiration. She was being stronger than he could have imagined. The social worker took a deep breath and offered a small smile, almost imperceptible, but it showed a hint of respect for Sarah's resolve. "All right," she said finally. "Here's what we'll do. I'll check the available resources for you, and we'll conduct a full assessment of your situation. I'm not saying it will be easy, but if everything checks out, we can consider the possibility of you keeping him, temporarily, until something more permanent can be arranged." Damon and Sarah exchanged looks, relief mixed with concern. They knew nothing was guaranteed yet, but this was the first spark of hope. They would do everything they could to keep Liam with them. The social worker said her goodbyes, promising to return soon with more information. When the door closed, the apartment fell into a strange silence. Damon let out a long sigh, while Sarah, still holding Liam, whispered softly, "We'll make it, Damon. I know we will." Olivia wandered through the streets, her strength all but gone, her body exhausted from both physical and emotional fatigue. Time seemed to drag, with each minute without Liam feeling like a blow. She could barely feel her feet on the ground, wet and aching from hours of desperate walking. Her face, soaked with both tears and rain, reflected the anguish consuming every fiber of her being. At every corner, Olivia hoped to find an answer, a clue, any sign that her son was safe. But the cruel reality was that no one knew anything. No one had seen the baby or the garbage truck she feared so much. Her mind began to work against her, painting increasingly darker scenarios of what could have happened to Liam. She stopped in front of a dirty alley, her heart racing, and let herself slide to the ground, completely drained. Her eyes stared blankly, unable to focus on anything but the guilt eating her alive. "I've lost him," she whispered to herself, her voice broken. "I lost my baby." She wrapped her arms tightly around her chest, as if trying to shrink and disappear from the pain. And for a moment, she truly wished she could. All she wanted was to go back in time, to undo the terrible night when she decided to leave Liam. But life wasn't kind to those with regrets. Olivia was trapped in her mistake, and now all that remained was a devastating emptiness. But even there, in the depths of despair, something pushed her to keep going. She knew she couldn't give up. Liam was still out there somewhere, and as long as there was a chance, no matter how small, she wouldn't stop. Olivia stood up, her legs trembling, and began walking again. Each step felt like an enormous effort, but she forced herself to keep going. Her search wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, in Damon and Sarah's small apartment, the reality of caring for Liam was just beginning. Sarah had spent most of the day beside the baby, amazed at how calm and serene he seemed in her arms. Liam slept deeply, but each tiny movement he made stirred in Sarah a wave of love and protection she hadn't thought she would feel again. Damon, on the other hand, sat in the living room, worried about the challenges that lay ahead. He knew the social worker was right. Raising a baby required more than just love. They would need resources they simply didn't have. Even with the small help Sarah had gotten from the hospital, some donated diapers and cans of formula from her nurse colleagues, it wouldn't be enough in the long run. "Sarah," Damon called, sitting beside his wife on the worn-out armchair in the apartment. "I've been thinking, maybe we should look for somewhere else to live. Something more stable. If we're really going to fight for him, we need something better than this place." Sarah looked at Damon with tenderness, knowing he was right. The reality was harsh, but the love she felt for Liam pushed her not to give up. "I know, Damon. I've been thinking the same, but we're going to need time and money, and we don't have much of either." Damon sighed, running his hand through his hair. "I could pick up more hours at work, talk to my boss, and see if I can get extra shifts." He glanced at Liam, now sleeping soundly in the small space they had improvised as a crib. But what if it's not enough? Sarah took Damon's hand, squeezing it firmly. "We'll figure it out. I can try to get more hours at the hospital, and we'll save every penny. He's already lost so much, Damon. We can't let the system take him back." Damon felt a pang of pain in his chest hearing that. He knew Sarah was right. Liam had been abandoned, left behind by someone who probably thought they were doing the right thing. Deep down, Damon knew they were Liam's only chance at having a life where he would truly be loved. "I won't let that happen," Damon said firmly. "No matter what we have to do, we'll keep him." The hours passed, and night fell once again over the city. Olivia, exhausted and emotionally drained, found herself lost. She had wandered through endless streets and alleys, asked strangers, and searched every possible lead, but had found no trace of Liam. She stopped in front of an old church, the stone building weathered, with a cross on top that looked as ancient as the city itself. The church bell chimed softly, echoing through the empty street. Without thinking, Olivia walked through the heavy doors and found herself in a quiet hallway, only the flickering light of candles lining the altar. Sitting down on one of the wooden pews, she leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, silently sobbing. For the first time since that fateful night, she felt completely defeated. "God, what have I done?" she whispered. There was no one there to hear her, but the words came out anyway. "What have I done to my son?" Olivia wasn't a religious person, but in that moment, her pleas were a desperate cry for redemption. She didn't know what to do anymore. All she wanted was a chance to fix her mistake, to hold Liam in her arms again and beg for forgiveness. But the harsh reality was that she had no idea where he was or if he was even alive. As she sat there in the silence of the church, something inside her began to shift. Maybe it was resignation, or maybe it was desperate hope, but Olivia felt a strange calm wash over her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she wouldn't give up on Liam. No matter how long it took, or how many doors she had to knock on, she would find him. Back at the apartment, Damon and Sarah sat on the couch, watching Liam sleep. The silence between them was comfortable, but filled with tension about the future. Damon watched the baby's soft breathing and felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He didn't know how they would manage this, but he was willing to sacrifice everything to keep that boy safe. Sarah, still emotional about having Liam in her life, squeezed Damon's hand, pulling him back into the moment. "He's here now, and that's all that matters." Damon nodded silently. They would do anything for Liam. Even though the journey was only just beginning, with each passing second, the fates of Olivia, Damon, and Sarah drew closer together. Olivia's despair was about to collide with Damon and Sarah's newfound hope, and none of them knew just how much their lives were about to change forever. The next day dawned gray, with thick clouds covering the sky over Detroit. The cold to sink deeper into the bones. But in Damon and Sarah's small apartment, The atmosphere was a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The social worker was due to visit again to discuss the conditions that would allow them to keep Liam, even if only temporarily. Sarah had spent the morning cleaning the apartment, while Damon organized the few clothes and items they had managed to gather for the baby. Liam, however, remained peaceful, unaware of the whirlwind surrounding his new life. He was the center of Sarah's attention, and she couldn't take her eyes off him. With every smile, every tiny movement of his arms, she saw the hope she had lost so long ago. To Sarah, this baby meant more than just the chance to be a mother. It was a second chance at living something she believed was lost forever. Damon, on the other hand, remained quiet. He knew Sarah's love for Liam was unshakable, but the reality still weighed heavily on him. With the social worker's visit approaching, doubts crept back into his mind. He wasn't sure if they could convince the authorities that they were capable of raising Liam. He knew that, with his job as a garbage collector and Sarah's unstable nurse salary, they were far from the ideal candidates to care for a baby. The social worker, a woman with a serious demeanor and professional gestures, arrived in the early afternoon. Damon welcomed her with a tight chest, Sarah beside him with Liam in her arms. The woman entered, her eyes quickly scanning the small space, evaluating every detail. It wasn't a luxurious home, far from it, but it was clean and organized. The apartment may have been simple, but it exuded warmth, especially now with little Liam at the heart of their new routine. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she began, sitting on the couch with a notepad. "I have to be honest with you. The foster care system has very strict rules. I understand you're doing your best, but you need to be prepared for the fact that it may not be enough." Sarah held Liam tighter against her chest, as if shielding him from the woman's words. "We understand," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "But this boy, he chose us. He's already part of us, even if it's just for a while. We love him, and we'll do anything to keep him safe." Damon, who had remained silent, took a deep breath before speaking. "I know we don't have much to offer, but this baby doesn't need wealth. He needs a home, people who care about him, and that we can give." The social worker looked between the two of them, her gaze thoughtful. She made a few more notes before closing her notebook and placing it back in her bag. "I'll be honest with you. Liam's situation is complicated. Finding a permanent home will be a long process, and he may end up moving through several houses before that happens. We know how damaging that can be for a child this young." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, whispered, "So why not leave him with us? He's already here. He's already loved." The woman sighed, seeming to consider Sarah's words. "I will do what I can to help you, but for now, he's still under the temporary care of the system, which means we will continue monitoring the case." Damon and Sarah exchanged glances, a mix of relief and tension in the air. It wasn't the guarantee they were hoping for, but it was a start. The social worker left, leaving behind the weight of uncertainty. While Damon and Sarah fought to keep Liam, Olivia was growing closer to a resolution. After days of despair, she finally found a lead. A garbage collection worker, moved by Olivia's desperate state, told her that a baby had been found by one of the drivers. He didn't know where the child had been taken, but the information was enough to ignite a spark of hope in Olivia. Her son was alive. Olivia felt her legs buckle with relief when she heard the news. That small thread of hope kept her standing as she clung to the idea that Liam was safe, that maybe he was in a secure place. Her next step would be to find out who had found him and where he was now. Days of uncertainty and desperate questions finally led her to the name Damon Miller, a simple garbage collector like the workers she had spoken to. Olivia's heart raced when she heard his name for the first time. This was it. This was the beginning of the answer she had been searching for. She discovered where he lived and decided she would go there. She had no idea how she would be received, but now she knew she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. It was her only chance to fix the mistake she had made. Olivia knew she couldn't turn back time, but if Liam was safe, she was willing to fight for him. Damon and Sarah's apartment was peaceful that night. Liam slept quietly in the makeshift crib, and Sarah watched him from a distance, a soft smile on her face. Damon sat beside her, holding her hand. "Do you think everything will work out?" Sarah asked quietly, her eyes still on the baby. Damon looked at her, feeling the weight of the question. I don't know, but I know we're going to fight for him. We love him, Sarah. That has to count for something. Sarah smiled at Damon, grateful for the unconditional support she always found in him. Yes, we already love him so much. The comfortable silence that hung over the apartment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was late, and Damon and Sarah exchanged surprised looks. Who could it be? Damon stood up, walking cautiously to the door. When he opened it, he came face to face with a woman who looked worn out, her eyes swollen from crying, but with a determined look etched on her face. It was Olivia. "Are you Damon Miller?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Damon nodded, confused and cautious. "I am. Who are you?" Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heart almost leap out of her chest. "My name is Olivia, and I'm Liam's mother." For a moment, the world seemed to stop for Damon. He stood frozen in the doorway, her words echoing in his mind, trying to process what he had just heard. Sarah, who had been in the back of the apartment, approached when she heard Liam's name mentioned, her heart racing as well. Olivia looked from Sarah to Damon. Her eyes were full of tears, but her determination didn't waver. She had waited so long for this moment, even though she wasn't sure what she would do once it came. I don't know what to say," Damon began, still trying to comprehend the situation. "I know it sounds crazy," Olivia said quickly, her voice cracking, "but I made a terrible mistake. I left my son behind because I thought it was best for him. I thought he'd be better off without me, but I was wrong. I can't live with this. I need to see him. I need to know he's okay." Sarah, now standing beside Damon, looked at Olivia with a mix of shock and understanding. She could see that this woman, standing at their door, was devastated by guilt and fear. But she also knew that she and Damon had grown attached to Liam in a way that made it impossible to simply give him back. "He's okay," Sarah said calmly, trying to reassure Olivia. "He's safe with us." Olivia broke down in tears upon hearing that, covering her face with her hands. Thank you for taking care of him, but I need to see him, please. I need a chance." Damon and Sarah exchanged glances. What were they going to do? Liam had become a part of their lives, but standing at their door was his biological mother, broken by regret and desperation. The decision they would make in the next few moments could change all of their lives forever. The silence that filled the small apartment was deafening. Damon, Sarah, and Olivia stood there, staring at each other, each carrying a different but equally devastating burden. Damon's heart pounded so hard he could feel the pulse in his temples. Sarah gripped her husband's hand tightly, while Olivia, standing at the door, looked like she was on the verge of collapse. The fate of Liam, the little boy sleeping in the next room, was the only thing tying these three very different lives together. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," Olivia began, her voice trembling, "but you have to understand, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left him. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I abandoned him." The words came out broken, as if each one tore her apart inside. "Please let me see him. I just need to know that he's okay." Damon took a deep breath, struggling against the flood of emotions washing over him. He had found Liam, saved him from the brink of disaster, and now here he was, beside Sarah, with an unbreakable bond forming with the baby who had somehow become the center of their world. And now, in front of them, stood Liam's mother, as broken as when he'd found her that night by the dumpster. Sarah looked at Damon, tears in her eyes, searching for some kind of direction, an answer to the unspoken question between them. She knew how deeply they had grown attached to Liam, but she also knew that the woman standing before them was seeking redemption. "Olivia," Sarah began, her voice soft and empathetic. "We love Liam. We can't lie about that. He's already a part of us." Sarah held back the tears threatening to fall. "But he's your son. And as much as it hurts us, you deserve to see him." Olivia looked at Sarah in surprise, gratitude spreading across her weary face. Thank you for not hating me." She stepped closer to the door, moving slowly, as if each step brought her closer to an uncertain fate. Damon said nothing. Still processing everything, he walked to the room where Liam was sleeping. The little boy was bundled up in a pile of blankets, breathing softly. Damon watched him for a few seconds, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew that, From this moment on, nothing would be the same. He carefully picked Liam up, and as he held him in his arms, he realized just how deep his bond with the baby had become. But now, that bond would be tested. When Damon returned to the living room with Liam, Olivia saw him for the first time since that fateful night. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. The sight of the baby, safe in Damon's arms, brought overwhelming relief, but also unbearable pain. There was her son, the life she had brought into the world but had left behind, thinking she couldn't give him the love he deserved. "Oh my God," Olivia murmured, reaching out her hands but hesitating to take him. "He's so big, so healthy." Tears began streaming down her face, a mix of relief at seeing him and guilt for having left him. Damon, his face stern but his eyes misty, stepped forward and handed Liam to Olivia. She took him gently, almost afraid to hurt him. When Liam settled into her arms, something shifted inside her. For the first time since his birth, she truly felt the connection between mother and child. The warmth of Liam's body against hers made her heart race. She started to cry, quietly sobbing as she stroked the baby's head. "I'm so sorry, my baby," Olivia whispered, holding Liam close to her chest. "I never should have left you. Never." Sarah, standing next to Damon, watched the scene with a heavy heart. Seeing Olivia with Liam made her think of all the nights she had spent by the baby's side, rocking him to sleep, giving him love. The bond between Sarah and Liam had grown so strong that now seeing him in his biological mother's arms made her feel like she was losing something precious. Damon watched Olivia with a mix of compassion and frustration. He knew that, in some way, Olivia had a right to be there. But the truth was that Liam, to Damon and Sarah, was more than just a baby they had found. He was the missing piece in their lives, something they hadn't known they needed until he arrived. "Olivia," Damon said in a deep voice, breaking the silence. "We don't know what happened to you that night, and we're not here to judge you, but you need to understand that we've become attached to this boy, and we're not just going to hand him back like nothing happened." Olivia lifted her eyes, still holding Liam, but what she saw in Damon wasn't anger. It was a sincere plea. He wasn't trying to push her away, but he didn't want to lose the baby that he and Sarah had learned to love. She nodded, understanding. "I know I can't just show up and take him away," she said, her voice low. "But I need a chance to be the mother he deserves. I know I made a terrible mistake, but if there's any way to fix this, I want to try." Sarah, standing beside Damon, watched the scene with a heavy heart. Seeing Olivia with Liam made her think of all the nights she had spent by the baby's side, rocking him to sleep, giving him love. The bond between Sarah and Liam had grown so strong that now, seeing him in his biological mother's arms, made her feel like she was losing something precious. Damon watched Olivia with a mix of compassion and frustration. He knew that, in a way, Olivia had a right to be there. But the truth was, for Damon and Sarah, Liam was more than just a baby they had found. He was the missing piece in their lives, something they hadn't known they needed until he arrived. "Olivia," Damon said in a serious tone, breaking the silence, "we don't know what happened to you that night, and we're not here to judge you. But you need to understand that we've gotten attached to this boy. We can't just give him back like nothing happened." Olivia looked up, still holding Liam, but what she saw in Damon wasn't anger. It was a sincere plea. He wasn't trying to push her away, but he also didn't want to lose the baby he and Sarah had grown to love. She nodded in understanding. "I know I can't just show up and take him away," she said softly, "but I need a chance to be the mother he deserves. I know I made a terrible mistake, but if there's any way to fix this, I want to try." The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, adjustments, and above all, learning. Damon, Sarah, and Olivia, three people whose lives had unexpectedly intertwined, were now dealing with a new dynamic, trying to find balance amidst the chaos. Liam, the little baby who unknowingly had changed all of their lives, remained the center of it all. He now had not just one home, but two hearts vying for him, not out of selfishness, but out of love. Olivia began visiting Damon and Sarah's apartment almost daily. Each encounter was heavy with emotions, regret, relief, but also a strange, new hope. At first, the tension was palpable. Damon and Sarah were always cautious, afraid that Olivia might try to claim Liam back at any moment. And Olivia, in turn, struggled with the guilt she felt every time she saw the baby in someone else's arms. During those first weeks, the social worker closely monitored the situation. She knew that this kind of arrangement was rare and risky. Initially, it seemed like an impractical idea, a baby divided between two families who, despite having the best intentions, were on opposite sides of the same emotional coin. But something began to shift over time. It wasn't easy, but for Liam's sake, Damon and Sarah opened their doors to Olivia, and she, in turn, began to show a strength that no one, not even she, knew she had. One morning, Olivia arrived at the apartment with a heart lighter than usual. When Damon opened the door, Liam, who was in his arms, babbled something that sounded to everyone's ears like a small "mama." The sound made the air in the room freeze for a moment. Olivia, in disbelief, took a step forward. He called me?" Olivia whispered, her eyes wide with emotion. Damon and Sarah exchanged glances, feeling the weight of the words. Sarah smiled softly, trying to hide the pang of hurt she felt, but also understanding the importance of that moment for Olivia. "Yes," Damon said, offering Liam to Olivia. "I think he's starting to recognize you." Olivia took her son into her arms, tears welling up in her eyes. She rocked him gently as he grasped her fingers with his tiny hands, and the feeling of finally being accepted as his mother washed over her like a warm wave. There were no more doubts. She would do whatever it took to be the mother Liam needed. Sarah watched the scene, and although she knew this moment was Olivia's, she couldn't help but feel proud of herself and Damon. They had helped Olivia find her way back, and that, as painful as it was also a triumph. Sarah knew that her role in Liam's life would be different, but no less important. They were a family, though in an unconventional way. As the months passed, the dynamic between them began to evolve. Olivia, who had found a temporary job at a coffee shop, was slowly getting back on her feet. She split her time with Liam between her home and Damon and Sarah's apartment. Instead of harboring resentment or trying to push each other away, the three adults began to work almost like a team, each caring for Liam in their own way. One day, during one of Olivia's visits, the three of them sat at the table, watching Liam play with his few toys scattered across the floor. It was a moment of peace, something rare since everything began. The tension that once filled the air had noticeably faded. "He's getting stronger," Damon commented, smiling as he watched the boy clumsily get to his feet and try to take a few short steps. Sarah, sitting beside him, laughed softly. "Yes, he's going to be sharp," Sarah added, "and stubborn, I bet." Olivia, sitting next to them, watched with a serene smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. She had spent so much time trapped in guilt and fear, worrying that she could never be a good mother to Liam. But as she watched him play and laugh, surrounded by people who loved him, she knew there was a chance to fix what had been broken. I wanted to say something," Olivia began, her voice soft but sincere. "I know none of this has been easy for any of us, but you've given me a second chance. I don't know how to thank you for that." Damon looked at her, his expression softening. "I think we've all gotten a second chance, Olivia. It's not just you." Sarah nodded, briefly taking Damon's hand. "We wouldn't have made it without you either. Liam deserves everything we can give him. And now he has it all. He has you, he has us, and most importantly, he has love." Olivia smiled, feeling the warmth of those words fill her chest. For so long, she had believed she didn't deserve Liam's love, that she wasn't capable of being the mother he needed. But there, in that room, with Damon and Sarah by her side, she knew they were on the right path. Liam had something rare. He had three people who were willing to fight for him, who were willing to love him unconditionally. The years passed, and all of their lives changed in ways they could never have predicted. Damon and Sarah, with Olivia always nearby, created a unique family where the bonds were not built by blood but by love and sacrifice. Liam grew up surrounded by love, splitting his time between both homes, never doubting how deeply he was loved. Olivia, in time, found her footing. She rebuilt her life, and with time, the guilt that once consumed her began to fade. She knew she had made mistakes, but she also knew she had done everything she could to make things right. And Liam, with his bright smile and boundless curiosity, was living proof that love could be enough to mend even the most broken hearts. On Liam's 4th birthday, the 3 adults gathered once again to celebrate. A small party in the park with colorful balloons and children's laughter. Liam ran back and forth, laughing and playing, while Damon, Sarah, and Olivia watched from afar, exchanging looks of contentment. "Look at him," Damon said, smiling. "I can't believe that the baby I found that night has grown so much." Sarah chuckled softly. "He's our little miracle." Olivia, her eyes misty, simply smiled. "Yes, he is, and we're all so lucky to have found him, and each other." In that moment, under the blue sky of the park, with Liam's laughter echoing in the background, Damon, Sarah, and Olivia realized something they had known deep in their hearts. They had become something much more than just acquaintances. They were a family, an unlikely family, formed through pain, redemption, and above all, unconditional love for a little boy who had brought their lives together forever. The end. This is the conclusion of the story, where Damon, Sarah, and Olivia find a way to share their love for Liam and together create a unique family. They each confront their fears and guilt, but they manage to build a better future for the boy who united them. What do you think of the ending?